trying to slice a tomato with a 2x4.
Oh, my God.
Those were just some of his M-isms that the kids loved.
He said that they would never miss an Edinburgh parade. But when we would put GM in the parade, we couldn't put any bands anywhere near because the volume of the Lancers would outsound them.
Yes.
Wow.
The street would practically vibrate when the Lancers came by.
Yeah. They had enormous number of people in the band. That was just the seniors alone that year.
Yeah. The one trip we took to Florida, we had 296 people, 6 Campbell buses.
Wow.
Do you recall, was that maybe 96 or 98? Do you recall the
I don't
years?
remember the year,
Yeah.
but it was, yeah.
That was a
It was
large
probably
number.
the largest.
Here they are
Probably
coming down Main
96,
Street.
I bet.
That's the late 90s, you said?
This was 2006.
Wow.
Wow.
Has anyone categorized how many trips GM marching band made to Florida?
Oh, that's a good
First one
question.
was in February of 90.
That was the trip that I was the president, and Linda and I used the excuse, we need to get the keys organized, so we got volunteer chaperones, and you all went on the buses, and we flew down there to get
Yes,
the
you
keys
did.
organized.
You did.
We did that 3 times, 90, 92, and 94. It was a good excuse.
Yeah.
Oh, I said here, for Disney, every other year, M would take the marching band to Disney. The kids loved it. The parent chaperones loved it. Disney loved it. M tolerated it. I said, bless his heart. Really, how many years can one go to Disney and still find the magic?
He needed a haircut at some point. He always got a haircut when we went to the Magic.
I said, Marilyn could be found whizzing on some roller coaster ride, and M would be found snoozing on some bench somewhere.
Yeah. Same at Kennywood, too.
Yeah,
Over
oh,
by
yeah.
the bungee jump, because he was watching. He didn't want the kids on the bungee jump, because that wasn't allowed. However, when you go over there, John was like,
Oh, he was not monitoring it very well.
no.
We followed that band everywhere in the county, no matter what the weather was like. And there was often mud. And we watched that large band so determined. They went through the mud, and they kept going when their shoes were sucked off their feet.
Yeah.
And they'd keep going, didn't miss a beat. And Marilyn said at one time her shoe patrol recovered 34 shoes in the mud.
I remember.
And you
Fairview.
never knew it. They just kept going.
Wow.
You remember Fairview? It was that one of those muddy
Yep.
days, and there were shoes everywhere, but they kept going.
Yeah, yeah. That's determination.
That is.
Yeah.
They wanted to do their best for M. That's what I found, that the kids always wanted to do their best for him.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget they would always begin, the announcer would say when they were at competitions, is the GM band ready? And loudly the boosters would say, they're always ready. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good segue into us actually getting rolling on this thing. You guys are experts at podcasting, I can tell you that. You're already rolling, and I'm interrupting you, but I need to start us off the right way. So this is the General McLane Legend Series. This is our second podcast in the Legend Series. Many of you probably heard the podcast that we did with Jim McDonald. That started us off, and most appropriately now we are following that up with a John Marszalek tribute. So I communicated with Marilyn and said to her, Marilyn, bring me together a force of people that can talk about John and can really give us the stories that we need. And you were the people. And there are more people standing over there that will be joining us as well as we go through really John's establishment of the marching band, his legacy here at General McLane, and along the way, the stories and the impact and all the things that you guys have already started to talk about. So we're excited to have you all here. What I'd like you to do is start off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about, how you came to be here today. So let's start off with Ron.
Well, I'm proud to be here because John, special man. And we met him in August of 1971. My wife, Mary Kay, and our son, Todd, was age 3, and we lived in the head resident apartment in Schaefer Hall, which was then called Edinburgh State College. So John was one of 400 male students. And when we talked to John, and John is with his Pittsburgh accent and me with my Pittsburgh accent, we thought, doing good. I'm going to like it here. And like it he did, and like him we did. He was a wonderful person, and everything that he did, along with Marilyn, his wife, and Rick and Judy, it was just marvelous to be a part of it. So we knew, even in 1971, he was someone special.
Sandy?
I came to the band. I'm a band kid myself. I have 6 kids that were all in band at one time or another. I have 2 grandkids in the General McLane School District at the moment. I first met Marilyn and John in preschool. Our Christians went to preschool together, and we've been friends ever since. And I was on the booster board for 10, 12 years, something like that, forever.
I think it's a record.
Planned numerous trips to Florida and just enjoyed every minute of it, and enjoyed him, and going to get through this without crying.
Okay. That's a good way to do it. Rick?
Yeah, I'm Rick Scaletta, and I probably literally am here because of John. He came to General McLane in 1975, and there was not much happening. I think that people now wouldn't recognize General McLane of 1975. It was pretty podunk, to put it bluntly, and not much happening and not much respect throughout the county. So John came, and the marching band was very small. I've heard between 18 and 30. And by 1980, there were 180 kids in the marching band. Wow. And 1980 was the year I graduated from Edinburgh. And at that point, they said, well, John needs some help with the band. And there wasn't much of a choir program, so was there somebody from graduating from Edinburgh had both instrumental and vocal background? And that was me. And that's how I came to be here.
Randy?
Our daughter Susan, this is Randy Hunsberger. Our daughter Susan, very musically inclined, a pianist, and she went on to be the accompanying at the choir for years. She couldn't sing much. I shouldn't say that. She was an excellent piano player, and she played softly. So the main entertainers, quite honestly, were able to, lost my headset here, were able to be heard. So anyway, I was the club master in Edinburgh, and we ran a cheese and sausage sale. So at the first band booster meeting, I said, well, we're going to need money in 2 years for the students. Would you like to be in charge? And so that's how I got involved in the band boosters. Vice president the next year, president for 4 years thereafter, with a good, competent Sandy Weber, who was my vice president, went on to be president for years.
Ginny?
My name is Ginny Keim, and I met the Marszaleks. It was baptism by fire back in 2003 as my oldest son, Rob, was in marching band, and my second child, Peter, had Marilyn for 4th grade. So I met both of them in the same year, and it was great to get to know both of them at the same time. And all 3 of my kids were in marching band. Peter just for 1 year, because then he went on to focus on soccer. But then I was with John all the way through his second to last year. And my daughter Julia was with him, and then he spent 1 more year here at General McLane before he retired. But I just want to say I'm so honored to be asked to be here today. He was an amazing man that just affected so positively literally thousands of people in his lifetime. And with his absence, he leaves an enormous hole in the fabric of the society, of the community that is Edinburgh. So I want to thank everybody, the people that chose today's panel, and I want to thank them for asking me to be here. That it was a real honor. So thank you very much.
And there could obviously be a lot more people. I had to slow Marilyn down and say, okay, we have X number of chairs. We have 6 chairs and 6 mics, and so we're going to be, and we do have more people here. For anyone watching, we will be rotating people out occasionally, and people over there are other people that we'll introduce whenever they come in. We will find good natural times for you guys to come in, and if there's any time you want to come in, I'll give up my seat in a minute. I'm Dan Mennow. Of course, we're still working here at General McLane in principal, and had the great fortune of working with John for many years in the beginning of my tenure as first assistant principal under Rick, and then principal for a number of years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But John played a tremendous role in my development as well, having great leadership here at General McLane between working with Rick and then being on my own as a principal for the very first time when Rick became superintendent. Having John here for those couple of years was pivotal to me. He was one of the people he was on our collaborative team of teachers, which meant that we met once a month, and those were the teachers that would give us feedback as an administrative team, something that Rick established long ago that Jason Keim and I continue to do today. And John was so pivotal in that role because he didn't wait for the team meetings once a month. He would just show up in my office. And you talked about the Pittsburgh accent. It would be, hey, you might want to think about this. I'm not sure you're getting a great response on this one, okay? So we would, and I would say, whatever, John, just tell me what to do, I said, John, here's the secret. I don't know what I'm doing. You know that, right? And he would say to me, after every master schedule I created, he was used to Rick, and I would try to make my tweaks, and take a risk. And he would come in and he'd say, you're going to get this figured out someday. You're going to get this. It's a little better than last year, but, Good. You'll get it. You're young. So, but he really was a huge support for me, and probably secretly ran the building for those years when I didn't know what I was doing. But very grateful to him as well for not only for what he did for me, but as Ginny said, for what he did for the community. But that's why we're here to talk about that. I want to revisit a little bit that beginning part, that origin of the band. And Rick, you were here for that. And Ron, it sounds like you were a part of that, watching him as a student going back to that time. So can we just start with that and let it run from there? Tell me stories about how did John end up here at General McLane? And you said the band had 18 kids maybe at that point, a very small band either way. What did he do, and how did that whole establishment of the origin begin, and how did we get to where we were when you started and continued with him in the 80s?
Dan, could I just interrupt?
Yes.
Maybe this might be a good time, because I was at the end of John's career. Maybe I could give up my seat now. And
that's great, Ginny, sure.
And let somebody else
That's good.
take over that was here at the beginning.
Ginny Keim's now running the podcast. I've been eliminated. Just
All I could say is he led by example. People wanted to be with him. He loved the students.
They did.
And they in turn loved him and respected him and admired him, so they would come in and join. How many professors would be known by their letter? He was known as M. That's respect. They admired him. And I'll never forget, as I said, as a student and then as a player, and then he went on to become a leader of players.
So, yeah, and I think that one of the things that contributed to the early success is what continued throughout. And, in education, I think it wasn't until the 90s we started talking student-centered. But that was John from the beginning. And I think that what he offered the kids was so new in 1975. And so, obviously there was music, but beyond the music, he was focused on them. and he also was very big on student leadership. And I think that was very new at the time, too, where kids weren't used to a teacher saying, why don't you do this? Or you take charge, be a leader. And so I think those were some contributing factors to the early growth.
So let's be specific about how he ended up here. He's a Pittsburgh guy. What made him want to stay in Edinburgh? Can you answer that? Did he decide that there was an opening at General McLane and he applied for that opening?
I can help
Pam,
with that.
introduce yourself to us, please.
I'm Pamela Marszalek Mikulcik. I am John Marszalek's second daughter, the middle one. So my dad actually did his student teaching at Titusville, and he really wanted the job there. There was an opening, and he didn't get it. So I'm thankful for that, honestly.
There's someone in Titusville right now saying, "Oh boy." I hope no one remembers that was me who made that sentence.
I know there's a story of my dad, his freshman year of college, where he got cut from the marching band because he wasn't a very good marcher at all. My mom can probably add on to this at some point. But I think that year he carried the ladder for the drum major, is what he said he did.
Wow.
But I think that was a good formative experience in terms of, you can make a difference whatever you do. And I think that's something that he always taught his daughters, all his students as well. But I also know, so I was hanging out with James W. Parker's grandson not that long ago. And he likes to tell the story of how his grandfather's greatest achievement in his tenure here was fighting for my dad to get the job when he applied for it. Because I guess my dad maybe didn't interview the best, and so it wasn't a shoo-in. And so I guess James Parker really, advocated for him. And so that's how he got the job here, which I think is super cool. That, another amazing person in the GM community who made such a difference is really, I don't know, so proud of the fact that he brought my dad here. That means a lot. So
had a gut feeling about him. Right? Had a gut feeling.
Right.
Who was the band director before your dad? Does anyone know the answer to that question?
Denny Kitchen.
Denny Kitchen
Yeah.
was, and then Denny went to the middle school?
Right.
And did Denny was just done with it? Or Denny didn't want to, when he moved to the middle school, it was no longer practical?
Yeah, I think that, it's a pretty common move from high school to middle school because of the huge amount of time with marching band and rain and weather.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the kids enjoyed the fact that he would provide the expertise, he would provide the knowledge, but he and Rick and Marilyn and Judy also gave them the acceptance. They gave them the encouragement. They were there for them, so they learned what to do, but they also knew that they were going to be supported and encouraged, and that was big.
Yeah, exactly. Band became like a huge family. Everybody cared about each other, and John, he did so many things that he never said anything about. He would help kids out. I asked some of my kids, I asked all my kids, they came up with all kinds of stories. Some I'll share, some I won't. They were, the one story, there was talk about his chair, that he had next to his desk. And, now this goes back to my oldest, who never got into any kind of trouble at all. But she did sit in the chair at one time. And so she was talking about that and how she appreciated that. And the other thing he did was give her a crystal mouthpiece. She played clarinet. She still has it to this day and still uses it when she practices. Just so many little things he did like that made the kids feel important, feel like they were a part of that huge community that was General McLane Band. And, I'm very grateful for it. My kids are very grateful for it. I know about 5 years ago, John and Marilyn came to Keith's wedding, and most of the kids are in education in some form, and the girls especially all took turns going up to John and going, "We're so grateful," and they cried and they thanked him for everything all those years, and how they use things that he taught them today in their classroom or with kids that they work with. Just so grateful for all that. It was that whole big family, out there. And like I said, he just did stuff for them and never needed credit for it. He just did stuff and made them feel a part, and it was so important, and made them feel. One thing he did tell her when he gave her that, she said, "Oh, I don't deserve this." He said, "Yes, you do." And she said, "But I don't play that well." He said, "Well, if you practice, you'll get those licks down." And she did. So, but just so many stories. So, yeah.
The transition from 8th grade to 9th grade, from the middle school to the high school, is difficult because these 8th graders are maybe 14 years old, 13 years old, and to come to the high school where it goes all the way up to almost 18 years old is a difficult transition. But having participated, both Sue and Scott, in the marching band the summer before they became 9th graders, they already had their group of family, meaning friendships that were cemented, and it made it a lot easier because of marching band and John Marszalek.
There are a lot of people have repeated the story of John showing up at their home when they decided that they weren't going to be a part of marching band anymore. And I just need clarification. Is that a true thing, or is that part of the legacy of John?
I think that's...
Did you see him leaving
Yes.
the house with the instruments going to people's houses?
Well, so I know he's told me the story that his first day of band camp, there was 18 kids. And he made calls that week and probably went to some people in person too. And I think by the end, he had doubled it by 30. It was 36 that first year. And so, but yeah, I know that he would reach out to kids, especially if he saw them having potential, not necessarily what they were currently doing, but my friend Summer Brinker Rock, she likes to tell the story that didn't really see a lot of potential in my clarinet playing, but he knew I'd make a good color guard captain. So he's good about recognizing where they would fit well.
And John was also so good with the parents. He knew the kids. Our son Todd was a drummer from when he sat on the floor by the kitchen and beat on the pots and pans. And then Marilyn was so good with him in percussion. So between them, he was sold. He loved the band. Our daughter Erin was French horn, but then when she worked with Judy with the Vims. But they loved it. They would smile, come home. We had a great day today. And we'd see him in town, and John knew us. Hi, Ron. Hi, Mary Kay. How's Todd doing? How's Erin doing? It was personal as well as professional.
Yeah.
And I like like that you say VIMS. I think that was something my dad made up.
Visual.
Yes.
Yes.
It stood for Visual Interpretive Musicians.
Wonderful.
And he came up with that because he wanted the students in the color guard to understand their role was as musical as the people that were playing. Yeah.
I know, we talked about him going from the 18 to 36 and eventually to what we all know, that these large numbers of kids in the marching band. It's really difficult from a leadership perspective to think about changing a culture that way. We've talked about this, Rick and I have talked about it recently as well, that when you have an established culture, changing it that quickly is extremely difficult. And you mentioned a couple of it. Persistence, we know, was one of his great traits. He didn't take no for an answer. He did that with me, in particular, with the schedule. He would come in every day or every quarter and say to me, "These are the kids that I need in the band this quarter." And that picture of the jazz band there reminds me of that every time I see it, because he knew what he needed. Jake's carried that tradition on as well, which, what I say to these guys and what I said to John was, well, looking at the schedule, this kid has, say, for example, calculus at that time, and they can't take jazz band. And he would say, well, let me know when you get it figured out. Yes. And then he would leave, and then I would figure it out somehow, and then he would say to me later, you put calculus where jazz band is. That was your first mistake. And so I thought, John, I can't put music everywhere and no other classes for kids. And he said, well, think about it. That's a possibility. You could maybe do that. Okay, we need to take a quick break for Casey to reset, and then we'll come back in shortly. Right, Casey? All right. And maybe... All right, so we're going to start segment 2 now on our tribute to John Marszalek in our Legend series. And we have some new faces here with us. I'm going to let them introduce. This time we're going to start over here with John. Why don't you start us off?
All right. My name's John Roden. I was a part of the band starting in 1994. It was the first day that John Marszalek put the saxophone in my hands. I went through the band and became the drum major, and we became very, very close. And through the years came back and taught band camp, and he kept me kind of at a close grip there for getting hired. And I've been at McLean for 18 years. I've been teaching band at the middle school, and I've been involved with all of it. So it's hard to know where to start, but he was the guy that started this whole thing for me too, right from day one. So. And
John was my student back in the day.
Yeah.
Senior English. That's
You're admitting that out loud. So
I'm admitting that. And any faults he has in English, they're not mine. Right? I just want to put that out there right now. Dr. Lane, of course, we know who Dr. Lane is, but he's been actually coordinating our Legend series and gave up his seat for the first run through so that he could make room for everyone else. So, Dr. Lane?
Thanks, Mr. Mennow. My name is Matt Lane, and I'm the superintendent in the General McLane School District. This is I'm about halfway through my 4th year now. So one of the perspectives I think that's unique that I bring to the conversation about John is I actually didn't know John professionally. So he and I didn't share time professionally in the same space, but I met him in the time, obviously, that I was here. Now, actually, one of the first conversations that I had with him was that when we met personally for the first time, I let him know, I know who you are. The idea of John precedes himself, not just in the GM community, but as a local outsider, everybody knew who John Marszalek was. So there wasn't any question in who he was and the impact that he had that I could talk more about later. But it's an honor to be here today and with this group of people that he influenced in so many ways over the years.
I want to return to the point of hiring, which popped into my mind when you mentioned it, because John plays a role in more hiring around this district than I think people are aware of, including many of us sitting in this circle right now. But Carol?
I first met John when I was a freshman here at McLean, and he and I worked on his very first homecoming. So I've had many years of working with John. I've been a band booster. I have worked with the band for about 28 years now, so I've been around a long time.
Jake?
My name is Jake Malec. I'm the current high school band director, and I actually went on the first Florida trip in 1989 in February. I was 10. My older brother was in the marching band. He was a freshman. And in Edinburgh, if you were in the band, it was just, you were just expected to be in the marching band, no matter what you did. I think like a quarter of the school was involved, and it was just something you did. It wasn't questioned. You just like, yep, marching band. And it was a really big part of my life, and I'll talk more about that later.
And Ginny's back with us again. She left her seat a little bit for the first go around. So in this segment, we're going to hear the perspectives of the people in here now, which are a little different, and we're a little bit further along in the journey of John, I think, with all of you. Although Carol, you and Jake, you guys both touch on some earlier times with him as well. So obviously all of that is going to be real important. And then Matt and I have the leadership perspective and the impact and the things that we know. But let's focus on the establishment. So in the last segment, we talked about the origins, where this came from. how John landed the job originally, how he used a lot of his skill to begin establishing the marching band. But you guys grew up, and Jake, you just cited how it was a part of the Edinboro culture. How do you feel? I'll start with you. How do you feel that he was able to do that as a student? And John, you were too, so feel free to both of you to chime in on this one. But from a student perspective, from a young person's perspective, growing up in this town, how did that happen? Because it doesn't happen in a lot of communities that are trying forever to do it and they can't.
Earlier, Rick Scaletta said that the band was very student-centered, and I didn't want to join band because of what I perceived as being with Mr. Marszalek. It was because the things he did for students. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I would see my peers slightly older than me playing music, having fun, and being good at it. And I wanted to be like them. What he provided for the students, I wasn't aware of everything he did for the students. I could just see that the students were competent and could play well and knew about music, and they were having fun. And I wanted to be with those students having fun. And that was all facilitated by John. And that is a really big legacy, because what makes students want to play music is being with their friends and playing and having fun and seeing that amongst their peers. And that camaraderie amongst the students was really important and a big impetus for me becoming a musician. I wanted that connection with other people.
Yeah, I concur the whole way through. I was fortunate enough to be neighbors with him. So I saw one of the boys on the street in the band playing saxophone, and I asked him, how he got to be in that spot, and they actually were next door neighbors. So he's like, "Oh yeah, you're talking to John next door. Oh yeah, you could play sax, no problem." So my dad got a saxophone at a yard sale and brought it home, and I didn't know what to do with it because I was 10 years old. I was like, "What is this thing?" And we figured out, yeah, let's sign you up, let's get you in there. And, from that first day walking into the middle school in its old form, when it had that S-shaped hallway and it was all brick everywhere and it was like kind of dingy at the time, sitting down, and this guy comes in, sits down. He's like, "All right, get out your mouthpiece, get out this, get out that." And we're getting all set up. And the first notes that came out were, to his credit, it was like, he had to listen to that. And nobody knows better than me these days. Like hearing that first note is like, oh boy. So he could see the gold in there. And, those kind of little moments in between, like, oh yeah, you got to do this, you got to do that. And, seeing each other in the neighborhood down in town, being like, "Hey guy, how you doing?" And meeting up with him and seeing him around town was always good. And I did feel like he had, a little piece of he had a little in with everybody in the group. And now as a teacher, I'm like, I don't know how you remember all that stuff. But having that personal connection and having him be like, "Oh yeah, you did good there. That's how you got to do it." And coming back, being willing to practice based on that connection that we had. Really set the stage for a lot of really hard work. And, coming in with a large class and looking at a band of 200 kids coming down the street, like overpowering the college band, I got to put it out there. We were number one for a long time in Edinboro versus the college, and having that feeling like I get to be a piece of that you got to take ownership. It's a total package was another one he used to say all the time. It's not just the way you play, it's the way you practice. It's the way you respect your teachers and make sure you're fulfilling your commitments everywhere. It was that too. Another one was, you got to put the time in. And if he saw you doing that, he was more willing to put you into leadership roles. And, if you recognize that about him, you're ready to throw it out there and do it. That really just opened all sorts of doors. So, being recognized as caring really, made a difference for me. From day one, like, "Hey guy, I like that sax, I'm in, I'm 10 years old. You like my sax? We're good." So, that was, a huge tipping point.
Now, did the term, is this just an administrative term, just something that we tossed around, or was this something that was well known out in the community and among band people? Did you guys also refer to yourselves as the band mafia, or did we only refer to you as the band mafia?
I heard it called the mob too.
Yeah.
A little bit.
And the reason, obviously, we did is because John got what he wanted.
Yeah.
You know, and we talk about the idea of, you know, the establishment, the connections and those kinds of things. But there was this side of John that also cared so deeply about the band and the reputation of the band. And if you messed with that, there was going to be a different John in a way that you saw. And that it surfaced a couple of times, I think, that all of us saw over the years, just to show, again, his passion for what his product was. And, it had to be a certain level. That was in performance, obviously, and he got that through that compassion and the relationships that he built with kids overall. That underlied the whole thing. But also just in the expectation for parents, right, Ginny?
Absolutely.
For booster members, for people helping out, for assistant coaches. So that level of expectation, I think, let's speak to that for a second. You know, what was that like?
I've got a good example of M getting what he wanted. Several years ago, well, quite a few years ago, the football team gave up running the concession stand. And as you can imagine, that was a big job to run that concession stand. And M stepped forward and said, hey, let's do this. Let's take this on. And I personally thought he was nuts. I thought, oh my God, how is the band going to run this thing? And he saw it as a cash cow. And he was absolutely right. He put his faith in the band boosters, and he got together with the boosters, with the people that run the band boosters, and figured it out. And they figured out how to incentivize the parents to work in the concession stand to make money for the kids to go to Florida. And it ran like a charm. It absolutely ran like a charm. And it was his idea, and he could see how it was going to work. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is a disaster area. But he got what he wanted. It worked perfectly, and kids got the money for Florida. It was wonderful. It was just a great thing. And so I'm not sure, does it still run today?
Yes, it's just still the same. We use the money
perfect.
for things the band needs. The students still earn. We can't call it. We're not a bank. But we can call it like points towards going to Florida, and they get that in their account, and they can use that for lessons, or if they need shoes, or anything that the band needs that we can use to support the band. So because we still want anyone to be in the band that can, and if they can't afford it, the boosters step in and they provide them with whatever they need. And it's a really great resource because music is expensive, and we have a great school district that provides tremendous support for us. Yesterday we had a curriculum meeting, and we were looking at the list of music classes that we have in General McLane compared to other school districts. And because of Rick and John, there's a very long list, much longer than other school districts, and just the musical opportunities we provide students and continue to provide them. And that's a legacy of John and Rick, and that's wonderful because I get to learn things and learn how to teach all this material, and that's super fun as a music teacher to be able to do and make those connections with students.
And it's so important to the functioning of our building every day. We have all these electives in music, and they're full because kids want to take them, and because we have, now we have Jake and Will who are down there, and they're full. And I'm saying to them, you're going to have this great. Some of the classes that they have are very interesting when I observe them, and they do it graciously. But it drives our master schedule still, and that, like you said, was established by Rick and by John. Just a side note real quick, we were talking about the Florida trip, and they mentioned John didn't particularly love to do the Florida trip. And I thought, I remember seeing him the day, I think or the day you were leaving, and he was walking into the auditorium, and I said, hey, heading to Florida, how do you feel? He was like, ugh. So that carries on, I think.
It's a lovely trip, and I love going, and it's awesome for the students. But it's just I get nervous before things happen, and then once they start, I'm okay. So I'm just kind of, did I do everything? Did I do everything that I was supposed to do? And the students are still amazing. We were in Florida, and there was we were about to march our parade, and then the Disney people got a call, and there was a problem with the route, and they had to cancel the parade. The Disney people doing the parade, and I brought the seniors over, and I asked them, and they were given, I want you guys to vote whether we're going to wait and see if we can do the parade, or you can go back in the park. And they all voted to do the parade. And Disney found a route through the park for us to do. And that day we were the entertainment. And I was very proud of the students for wanting to perform and play and show what they could, who they were. And student leadership drove that. I learned all those things from M. When we were unloading the bus, I didn't have to do anything. Knew how to unload the bus. They all got their uniforms. They got their instruments out. They started warming themselves up, and I learned all those things from M. And it was a really great day, and I'm glad we still do that trip. And
what other things were established by John that are, now in place?
I wanted to pop in on
Go ahead, John.
times that he got what he wanted.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Speaking to when I first got hired, it was great to have him in my corner. I made a bunch of mistakes right away, and he'd pull me aside. And, watching him kind of do those things we're talking about with other directors, we're talking right here in the building on schedule, with getting students to do it. There are a couple different angles he would take, but I think that what really brought it down for people was he was authentic. And when you went and talked to him, you were going to get the straight stuff. You knew he was going to tell you exactly how he felt, and you're going to walk away and process it, and you might not agree, but then you'd see the total package. You'd see the whole picture. Getting kids in there going and being like, we need that kid from calculus, or, you want the parade order to go a certain way. I'm going to go talk to him. So that was like a thing that I remember really specifically. It's like, don't write him an email, go see the person, go talk to him, look him right in the eye, tell him what you're looking to do. And, most times that's going to work out. I also saw him do it the opposite way. And this is at the Vet Stadium. He went belly to belly with one of the football coaches. That happened a couple times, and he was up there like, oh, heck. And we were basically, the football team from the other school came out while we were on the field finishing our show, and boy, did that tick him off. That's a big no-no. That's a big, don't do that. And I remember seeing him walk over across the field and just push his belly right up against the guy and get into it. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but he was defending his territory, and we all kind of were like, that's our guy right there. Nice. Another one was, having grown up in Edinburgh, and my dad worked at the university, and, knowing all the teachers in a different way. He said once, I have eyes and ears everywhere, and it's going to get back to me. And it was right when I was about to become a leader in the group, and he had heard something that I did. I'm not going to repeat that part. And, he sat me down in the ream chair, which got brought up recently. He'd close the door, and we'd had this conversation. He's like, I heard something about you. And he'd wait for me to chime in. And I'm like, oh man, what am I going to tell him? But I just knew that he had connections with everybody in town, and that network really made it powerful where, if he needed something little, he could go chat with somebody. If he needed something right now, he could go belly to belly with them because he was ready to go. And I think it all came back to his authenticity. He was ready to be right there, right then, and tell him exactly what was going on. He wasn't holding anything back. It was like, this is what we're doing. It doesn't fit the concept. That was another one I heard a lot. Based on, how he was doing things and why it was that way. So I guess that, knowing that he didn't have a facade, the agenda was to help the band, and there was no doubt about that, helped him really get what he wanted, no matter where it was.
If I could follow up, Carol, we need absolutely to hear from you because of the perspective that you bring to this. I did just want to follow up with what John said, because even though, as I said, John and I didn't overlap professionally, I knew right away that his perspective was one that matters. So one of the summers, he was driving the van around campus, I think just to check on things, because he did. I was walking around, and I said, I waved him down and said hi, and I asked him, about a certain thing. I'll just call it thing X. It did the specifics. We don't need to share in the podcast. But I said, we were talking about something, and I said, yeah, what do you think about that? What do you think about what they're doing with that? And he said, oh, that's a horrible idea. And I said, oh yeah. He said, but you know what? They'll figure it out. They will. And I think going back to what Pam said earlier, that idea of learning from failure sometimes, and was meaningful to him. And he saw that it was okay to do that as long as you learned from it, and it could become something afterwards. So, and I think that's that's just the impact that somebody has. The podcast is called, it's the GM Perspective, but we're in the Legend series. I think many of us are lucky if we have a moment of excellence. Many of us don't get to have that moment of excellence. And we're talking about John today because it wasn't a moment. It was a lifetime of it. Mm-hmm. The median age of this circle has dropped a little bit since we did the rotation. But I think what you'll notice is the impact hasn't. Mm-hmm. The stories, the impact, the way he shaped lives didn't happen in a moment. It happened over a lifetime, which is why he's part of this. And I think that's something pretty special because many of us, like I said, are lucky if we get a moment, and he was a lifetime of excellence. So I think remembering that and honoring that now is really cool. And Carol, you know that probably about as well as anybody too. So.
One of the things to segue with what you've just said and what John said is the fact that he took everybody. He would take the kids that were in trouble, and he would bring them in, even if they were just a manager, and he would give them things to do so that they could become successful. And once they saw that success, it changed their whole school perspective. He never sent a kid away. Mm-hmm. He always looked for the good. And if he saw a child doing something really positive, like John said, he would tell that student himself, but he would also bring it up in front of the entire group so that the group would see that there is validation in what you do, and that if you did really well, he noticed, and that could promote you to something bigger and better.
Mm-hmm. Agree, 100%.
On the tail of what Carol said, I wrote down a couple of examples of just that very thing. A friend of mine had a child with Down syndrome, and she said to me, "What am I going to do when Peter gets into high school?" And I said, "You know what? Maybe talk to M and get him in the band." And she said, "Oh, that's a great idea." And so she talked to M, and sure enough, M found a place for him in the marching band as a manager. And Peter then had a place where he felt he belonged, and he was a great manager while he was in school, and he felt like he belonged there. He got a sense of community, self-esteem, etc. And same thing when we had a foreign exchange student from Mexico. She said she didn't say she wanted to be in the band, but I knew it was a good place for her. She said she wanted to play soccer, and she was about 4'8", and I said, "Have you ever played soccer?" She said, "No." I said, "Ooh, maybe the band." And then she didn't play an instrument, but I knew that M would find a place for her, and indeed he found color guard was a great place for her in the flags. And it was a Disney year too. So not only did she get to experience band, but she met people in her 2 weeks of marching band before school even started. She met people. She had a place in the school where she felt she belonged. She got to see city communities and schools that she wouldn't ever get to see otherwise. And she got to go to Disney. And that was because M found that place for her in the band. And she left having a great experience. Never kicked a soccer ball, but loved her time in the marching band. So he always found a place for everybody.
Another thing that M was phenomenal at was taking kids' disappointment and turning it into something positive. My son wanted to be drum major in the worst kind of way because his sister was, and his sister was well known, and he wanted to be like his sister. Well, he wasn't given that opportunity, and he was really bitter about it. But then, Em talked to him, and Em gave him another leadership position. And Kyle recently wrote on Facebook that was the moment when he learned what real leadership was, is accepting the disappointment and learning how to deal with it and how to deal with people when you have that disappointment. And, that was probably one of my son's brightest moments, was that realization. And Em was really, really good at taking disappointed kids and teaching them that, yes, it's a disappointment, and disappointments happen in life all the time. You just have to learn how to accept it and deal with it and move on and find a way to fix that disappointment.
And that continues with the band today. That was the legacy. Part of the legacy that John established was a place for kids. And we're gonna find that place for you, and we're gonna make sure that you are. If there's somewhere to put, if you need somewhere to put someone, it will be here, and then he will find the right spot for them. And like we said, two things. John talked about the belly to belly with the football coach.
That was great.
Yeah, and I saw that one time also, and it wasn't with a football coach. It was with a parent, and he would not want me to. He would say, "I don't remember that," but it happened. I knew a parent was coming into the building hot, and it was a parent. It was I don't know. He must have had a booster meeting or something going on down there in the band room, and I was here and I watched. He had told me that there was something going on with this dad, so I saw the guy. I knew him, and I saw him coming in the front door, and I thought, oh geez. And by the time I'd come out, he was gone. The guy was gone. And I thought, what happened? And so he had already made his way down to the band room, and I said, I better go down there and check this out. So I went down, and I came from the gym area, and I turned the corner, and on the ramp, John, the dad is standing along the ramp, and John is belly to belly with him, and the finger was out. And
Look out, buddy.
It was a perfect this. I can't describe how it went. And I said, I just turned the corner, and he saw me, and he said, okay, all right. And he looked at me, he said, we have an understanding. And I said, okay. And the dad said, we're good. And he walked out, and I thought, that's great. John, can you handle, I have a bunch of those waiting for you. Can you handle those? But that certainly wasn't John's. That was the fierce defense for what he did, and for the band. But, as we talk about legacy as well, his ability to be connected with the right thing, the right decision for the band, the right decision for General McLane. And it extended beyond the band to everything, at General McLane and helping us with all those decisions. But it's important to note that when it came to hiring, and Matt and I can tell you there are certain people that a lot of people will tell us who to hire. For every position, people will tell us, hey, you got to think about this, or I have a friend, and you don't put a lot of value in a lot of those opinions. John also shared when it was important, and he would share with you what he felt. And that's why John Roden is here. That's why Jake Malec is here. Because you think I'd be a fool to hire John Marszalek's replacement without talking to John Marszalek. But even as, Will Stedman is now at the high school.
I was going to say, yeah. And
Will got here last year, right?
Yeah.
So one day I look out my window and I see John coming in the building, and I think, well, oh, there's John. And he's coming in. This is last year, right? And he comes in and sits down in my office and says, I know you got an opening here at the high school. And he said to me, I don't know how it's all going to play out, but Will Stedman is a good guy, and he should be somebody you think about, and I said, done. Done. So even last year, his impact, and obviously that was a different situation in hiring Will, where Will wanted to just come up. But John knew that too, and he had his finger on the pulse of that even last year.
That was a summertime van parking lot conversation as well.
Yeah.
He
showed up.
Roll the window down. Hey,
roll the window down.
Yeah.
And He said, "Hey, you want to talk about Will Stedman?" And I said, "Yeah." We were already through the process at this time, and we trust the process, and Will's coming up because he's already in the district. But that conversation ended, and for as much as I trust and enjoy our process, I'm like, okay, now we're good. Now I knew we were in a good spot with that getting the kind of the blessing, so to speak.
And after John retired, there were so many little things that that we would notice here that weren't being done originally, in that transition. So the custodians were coming to me and saying, the doors are unlocked. This door's unlocked. This light was left on. This, whatever part of the building. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Why suddenly do we have these issues? It's because John would patrol the building, and he would walk around the building every night or every morning and make sure that things were locked and things were put away. And he would leave me notes and say, this was what this needs to, you need to make sure somebody's doing this, so there was a big void in, the expectation of what he did in his job and what, we expected from anyone else. So he was constantly here, and patrolling. So
I'm wondering what it was like when you moved in, because when M was in there, I know his back room was jammed.
Oh boy.
Oh, jeez, Jake. Yes, speak for that.
I'm still going through stuff.
There's nothing left back there, really.
Well, yeah.
Just kidding.
No, it was, there's lots of music and books and stuff, and you just kind of go through it in catalogs, and it took a while, but it was a good experience to go through those things, and there were a lot of memories. I found pieces of paper with my name on them.
Wow.
From 20 years before. I was like, oh, hey, that's me. But
he saved everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely everything.
A couple of Matchbox cars.
Oh, yeah.
Totes full of Matchbox
Yeah.
cars.
What's in here? Oh,
There was this little drawer, and I hadn't looked in there for a couple. It was just there, and I just opened it up, and there was a trombone mouthpiece box. And I picked it up and was like, oh, it's heavy. There's a trombone mouthpiece in here. It's like $8,500. And I opened up the box, and there was a Matchbox car in there.
Oh. Years ago, I was volunteering at Thrifty Threads, and a uniform came in, a very, very old uniform came in, and one of the people at Thrifty Threads knew that my son was in marching band. They said, hey, maybe you want to take this and give this, to M. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, let me take that. Well, I happened to see Marilyn before I saw M. And I said, hey, Marilyn, I got this really cool old uniform. I think maybe M would like, no, don't give it to him. Don't even tell him about it. Oh, my gosh, he's got so much stuff. Don't even let him know you have it. And it was after that I would drive by the house, and I would see the garage door was open, and I could see what she was talking about. And then it was after that I saw their back room of his office, and I was like, oh, yeah, I can see he doesn't need that uniform.
And it was not just those areas. It leaked out.
Yeah.
His poor mother, that house, that was full as well. So at one point when I got a pellet stove, he said to me, oh, you need pellets, huh? All right, let me talk. I said, well, you have pellets? He's like, well, they're over my mom's. So he said, come over there today, right after school. So come over. So I went over to John's mom's, and I pulled in. He puts the garage door up. There's all these wood pellets in there. And he says, here, let's load you up. So he loads me up. But in addition to that, he checked my windshield wipers and discovered that they were no longer any good. And he said, hold on here a second. He popped them up, and then he went into a box in that garage, and there were windshield wipers everywhere of every size and type. And he said, these are perfect. So he gave me brand new windshield wipers. He said, pop your hood while he topped off my fluids.
Oh,
and we
yeah.
did it. He took care of me. And I had a truck full of pellets, brand new windshield wipers, and all the new fluids were topped off when I left his house. Or his mom's house.
I want to lob in here when you're done.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to switch up here in a
Okay,
second,
sorry.
get some new voices.
Just a quick story about snow tires.
Yeah.
As a first year teacher, your flat broke, and I had this crappy old car. And he's like, how's that car doing for you? I'm like, it's enough. It's getting me to school. And we're getting into October. He's like, you got snow tires for that? And I'm like, no. And he's like, what size are they? And I'm like, I didn't even know where to look. He's like, it's over here. So we went out in the lot and we looked at it, and he got out his, big George Costanza wallet, and he had this piece of paper and he had people's names on it with everybody's tire sizes. And I'm like, I'm on the list here. So he wrote it down, and within the next week, he's like, all right, hey, after school, go up to Jay's and talk to Mike. So I go up to Jay's and talk to Mike, and I'm like, I'm John Roden. He's like, oh yeah, like, John was here. He's got them set aside for you. Because, if you've been there, there's like a room with the tires, and the desk is there. And this was in a different place. He had hid them in the junkyard and wrote his name on them. So we went off. He's like, oh yeah, John tucked these away for you. And he set me up. So that was the first time. That happened 2 or 3 more times. Once was at his mom's house. He said, come over after school. We got the same size tires. He was so excited. So he hooked me up a bunch of times. And, that was great as a first-year guy. That was like $500, $600. And he's like, oh, I got a deal on them. Don't worry. I'll set you up. So just feeling that, like, he's thinking of tires. I'm thinking of, like, am I doing my job right? He's like, come talk to me. And it's, like, about tires.
And when we clean out areas here, Jake can tell you, we're still cleaning out areas, and we cleaned out an area. Jason's looking over here laughing because I didn't even know that this area really.
I didn't know it existed either.
Yeah, but there's an area off the stage.
Oh yeah,
with the ladder that goes up to it and then from the catwalk you can get back there, and from the back of the stage there's a little ladder going up to it. And we went in there and we flashed a light down in there, and I said, these are all Apple MacBook or Mac, whatever the Mac was from 1986 that had boxes. I don't even know. Rick would know which one that was. And I said, these are all computer boxes. And so we jumped down in there, and it was Christmas decorations. The whole thing was stuffed with Christmas decorations in there. And we were like, wow, I couldn't believe how much stuff was in there. But we found another little alcove that John knew was there, and it was just loaded with stuff. And I thought, what is that? Like, what did he do with all the Christmas stuff? But as we were, someone was talking about his love for the Christmas concert, for the holiday concert, and for decorating for that, and getting the boosters to decorate for it. And I thought, oh, well, this is where everything came from. And every year he would get more of that stuff and load it in there. So, have you checked the ceiling tiles in the band room?
Oh yeah, there's a set of drums up there, and
a whole set of cafeteria plates and trays.
That's recent.
Is there still a van seat in the drum?
Yep, that van seat's in there.
I love that. That's awesome.
See, I was on the opposite end of that. When I would sub for John, I would go in and he'd leave me a note what he wanted done. And he'd say, when you get a chance, can you work on cleaning up the back room? So I would say, sure. So I'd go in and I'd look. And one year I found, this is 99, 2000, I found programs from 1984. And I went, so I saved 3 of them, and I threw the rest out. Well, he came in on Saturday and found them, and he put them back. So the next time he asked me to clean, I took and I threw them in the trash can outside the gym, thinking I was safe. Came in, and he says, don't be throwing my stuff out. So then I thought, well, you don't need 150 programs from 1986. So the next time I cleaned it, I took him up to the girls' restroom in the 100 hall and threw them out. He didn't find those.
He probably sensed it, though. So.
I'm sure. He did ask me where they went. And I went, I don't remember.
Okay, we're going to shift gears here again. We're going to go to a new segment. I'm going to step out. We have plenty of people with plenty of stories. And this next segment, final segment that we're going to do is going to be storytelling. So we're just going to fill the mics here and let people tell their stories about John, continuing on with some of the stuff that we've done. Stay if you want. People that have been out, come on back. All right. Yeah, so you guys can just one of you lead and just kind of pick up where we were before.
Check.
Testing.
Hello?
1, 2, 3.
4, 5, 6.
I'm only getting left side my headset.
That's because your right brain left.
There it is. Thank you, sir.
All right. So I'll start off. When I first started working here, John discovered that I was a very good typist. I typed pretty quickly. In those days, by the way, they were dittos. And some of you don't even know what that is, but
I do.
when you made a mistake on a ditto, you needed a razor blade to scrape it off the back of the paper. But anyway, he said, "Hey, you're pretty good at typing. I'll tell you what. You do all my typing for me, and I'll take care of your cars." I thought, well, I don't know anything about cars. That sounds like a good deal. So that was the deal. And I had an old 72 Dodge Dart that had a lot of issues. And John lived at Cambridge at that time. So we took it down to Cambridge for him to service it. And I could forget what was wrong with it. And fortunately, we had another car because by the time John got around to taking care of it, the leaves from the autumn had actually imprinted on the hood. That's how long it was sitting there. So, but,
That's a long time.
But he loved the cars. And the night, Judy loves to tell this story. The 72 Dodge Dart had a lot of rust issues, but John kept fixing it up for me. And one night in the summer, I was coming out to a band rehearsal, and I'm on Lay Road, and it just, something seismic happens and the car stops. And so I call John. And so John comes driving out, and he gets under the car, and he's on his back looking at it. He just starts laughing and laughing and laughing. Here the frame actually completely rusted out. And and it was on the freshly tarred and chipped Lay Road. So he, of course, for some reason, had a winch, and he raised it up just enough for me to get it back to the house, but it wasn't raised up high enough. There was a scrape along of all the new tar and chip the whole way back to my house. But he was good with cars, but we had some interesting car stories.
It's funny you should mention car stories. When I went to visit John and Marilyn this summer, it was a hot day. And I said, I'm going to come over and see you. And he said, okay. So I said, I'm going to get some ice cream from the Dairy Supreme. He said, Marilyn likes vanilla. He said, but I like chocolate. So I took some over there, and when we were talking, and he said, Ron, I have something for you. He said, I remember when I came here to Edinburgh in 1971, you had a 68 Burgundy GTO. He knew the color, the year, everything. And he said, and you talked about your favorite car ever was a 55 Chevy convertible. He said, I have this for you. And John gave me this model of a 55 Chevy convertible that day. And another thing is we've talked about all the things, and he was a perfectionist in some ways. And when I was announcing, Mary Kay and I were up in the booth when he would host, when the bands would come in. He had that down to a system. And Gus Barbaro was one of the judges, and he was on the roof of the booth, of the speaker's booth. And when things are ready, he would stamp on the floor of the booth above us, and it was okay. And then if there was a change in the band, if the director was going to be someone else, he wrote down the pronunciation of he said, this is the way it's pronounced. And he said, they're going to do this song instead of this song. He would send his daughters up to the booth, and we'd hear, they were on the outside of the booth to come in and said, they're going to do a change. Titusville Band is going to do this. They're going to do this instead. He was a perfectionist, had it down. So the girls are knocking on the door. Gus Barbaro's on the booth saying the judges are ready now. It was a whole other thing. He was in command. He was in command whether it was directing the musicians or taking care of all the planning going in. We were very privileged to have John Marszalek in our lives.
Continuing with the automobiles, Susie went to Allegheny, and then 2 years later, Scott went to Clarion. And John always had a van. You always had a van. So I asked John, that would be the first year Susie was going to Allegheny, could I borrow the van? Absolutely, no hesitation, very gracious about loaning it. Scott and I would detail the inside and the outside. So there was no hesitation for the next 5 years that we were allowed to borrow because it came back detailed.
Well, so talking about cars, like I could do nothing to the car when I was in high school that my dad wouldn't notice. He would look at the tires and be like, "You hit the curb there. What happened?"
no.
And like, I remember my sister Lisa was driving. We had like a Pontiac Transport, so it was like one of those red minivan space-looking things, and she was like pulling up to the old post office mailboxes, and she like scraped the entire side of it, and so she thought that my dad might not notice if she used some nail polish on the side, and it looked terrible. And I was like, Lisa, like, just own up to it. He's gonna know. So, but he would get angry with us a little bit, but for the most part, like, you know, he went easy on us because everything was a learning experience, even those mistakes.
He would, when we would have the annual homecoming parade, he would say, "We'll be there." He would pass up competitions to be at Edinburgh University's homecoming parade. And as soon as they marched, they'd get on the Big Red and head out to the competitions. But if he had to miss them to be in the parade, he would do that. He assured us, "We'll be there, Ron, we'll be there." So they were second in the band only to the Spirit of the Scots, and then GM, and they thundered through the parade, and just they were known for their presentation, for their enthusiasm, for their dedication, and it was instilled in them by John M. Marszalek.
So right after those homecoming parades, sometimes he wouldn't bring Big Red back up to the school right away. So he'd park it in front of our house for the weekends. And then on Monday, when I was in middle school, he would drive us to school in it. And I remember being so humiliated and so embarrassed. And like now I would give anything just to have my dad drive me in Big Red again.
Yeah. Just thinking about him drive. I saw him drive the bus through town before. That was always great. You know, if somebody couldn't pop in and do the job, he was willing to do it. I've laughed at something Rick said. I'm going to kind of call him out a little bit. I feel like he was really good at knowing where estate sales were and where businesses were going out of business, and he would just like set it on the calendar. He knew he'd be there, and he'd be looking for stuff. And you'd come into school, and there it'd be like like a rack, like a coat rack, or like a big toolbox, or like 5 of them, or like, you know, he'd come in with this stuff, and you'd be like, "Where'd you get that?" And one thing that sticks with me is just he wouldn't tell you where he got it from, but he'd say, "I acquired it," and he'd, you know, "I acquired it," and it's like, okay, all right, we're using that. It's in the mix. And I just thought that was so funny because he had a beat on where the good stuff was, and he'd like get it and make sure he had it in the room for us and ready to go.
And that's why I called him the Polish Prince of Acquisition. and that applied everywhere in the school because whatever was up for grabs, he grabbed it. Which is why he always had whatever you needed, but it was quite an amount of critical mass there at the end.
He was the king of repurposing.
Yes.
So
yes.
When the trophy case from the front entryway went away, there was like 2 large like wooden like stages that he just brought home and made it into a mountain for his trains at Christmas. So, and I remember one of the posts from the past week. One of the kids from like mid-90s was saying he came and saw my dad when he first got the new band room when the addition was made, or the upgrades were made, and like it really struck him how proud my dad was of all the repurposed things that he was able to get this from this part of the building and use it over here, and like he just took such pride in that. So,
you know, when Mary Kay knew I was coming out here today, she was going through some of our albums, and we had these pictures. And can you all remember Miyagi from The Karate Kid? And he would stand like this, and he would look at the Karate Kid, and sometimes he would smile like this. And on one of the pictures, it was the pep band at one of the games, and our Todd was at the drums, and John was right there beside, and I looked, and he's standing like Miyagi. And he did that to his students because he was proud of them, and they were thankful for him. And we're so privileged that our Todd and Aaron were under his tutelage, under his advisement, and we were comfortable knowing they were in good hands. And that we knew there was no question when that band would come down, they were really dedicated. And then we looked, and the man in command.
Talking about John acquiring things, we in Band Boosters, he would come up to us and say, "I was in Pittsburgh." Okay, yeah, I went to this music store and I got some things I need. Okay, John, I got a deal. Okay, John, okay, yeah. Well, he wanted money, which we always made sure, because he knew what the kids needed and what would be good for the program and stuff. But we always envisioned him in some back room in some music store in Pittsburgh. It's dark and cloudy and dreary, and he's cutting a deal. Yeah, I'll take 2 of those. Yeah, But yeah, he was a good guy. There's lots of stories, lots of band stories, trip stories in particular. One that Marilyn really loves. Was one of the earlier trips down, and our room, I think I was with Carol Baker, and we were in a room right next to John and Marilyn and the girls. It was near Christmas time, so the chaperones decided to gather in our room, which was, as I said, next to John and Marilyn and the girls, who were small at the time. So a couple of the chaperones got permission, Marilyn got permission from someone to bring up a palm tree from downstairs, and we used it as a Christmas tree, and we decorated it with the Mardi Gras keychains that we each got that year, which John went up on stage and danced to that year. So we're over there, and we're just chatting and having a good time and doing a little gift exchange of Disney stuff, and next thing we know, we hear this boom, boom, boom on the door. And open the door, and there he is. It's like, yeah, well, we're trying to get up. And he couldn't even get it out. He's like, yeah, we're going. Could you keep it down over there? And so yeah, we moved the party to another room so they could get some rest. But yeah, it was a good time.
I remember every year, whenever I was a kid in the room, at some point during the trip, my dad would be like, "This is the last time we're coming." Like every year.
Yeah, so many stories.
John had an interesting approach to many things. I remember one time the band was on stage rehearsing, and there were kids with squirt guns. So he got the 2 kids, he brought them to the front of the band, sat them down facing each other, and said, "Okay, keep shooting each other until you're out of water." Which was great, because then they couldn't do it anymore.
Well, naturally, with the law of large numbers, as we had 180 or 190 or whatever numbers in trip 1, 2, and 3, which would be 89, 91, and 93, there would be disciplinary situations. Not many, but with that number of kids, and John would come and meet with the Band Booster Executive Committee, and he was very gracious, but he delegated to us to help with the decision on whatever had to be made under that circumstance. So I was appreciative that to the boosters, he had the confidence in us that we would assist him in decisions that had to be made.
And talking about the trip, you mentioned the Mardi Gras party. It was like a show that we went to.
Yeah, I danced that.
You danced
too.
there too. But I know that like it was kind of a nicer place where we would dress up, and it was a nice dinner. And I remember that there was just one kid who didn't have anything. And so I just remember my dad, and he was a bigger kid. So my dad just went through his clothes, and he gave him a jacket and some shoes and some pants. And he also like talked to me about like perspective and how, you know, I don't always get everything that I want, but I'm a pretty lucky girl. And yeah, I was.
Yeah.
You guys probably don't know this, but in the early years I was working with him, he said he would never have a band booster group, and he would never go to Florida. But I think that's the constancy of John in so many areas. One being always doing whatever it takes for the band program. The other one, you were talking earlier about the disappointment, and I think my first year was the first time the band went to competition, and I remember our first competition was at Edinburgh, and we got crushed. I mean, we got absolutely crushed, and I was a new teacher, so I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't really know why, but it was so disappointing. But and I don't think we won anything that year, but John's constant positivity about it, and you know, this is a learning experience, and it's not what matters. And there were times throughout the years I wondered, why are we doing this? You know, why are we going to these competitions? But he saw value in it, and the value, it didn't have anything to do with the winning. It had to do with the participation. And I think that's another thing that makes him very unique, is his consistency in all things. You just don't see that anymore in so many areas. And so many teachers, they change their path, or they just get lazy, or they quit worrying about certain things. And John never did. It was constancy that I think that, and that just sort of occurred to me today in these conversations.
I was just thinking about how he'd bring people in for band camp or otherwise, or for like a jazz event. He'd have a pro come in and show us what he could do. We'd go to adjudications and see professionals. And I remember him telling me about how, you know, if you don't know how to do it, you got to find somebody who can. And I always admired the fact that he was willing to share his spot with somebody from out of the school and then like give them the floor. And that happened a lot of different times where he was, you know, like thinking about all the jazz shows and band camps and, you know, former students and people with doctorates and people all around that he had made friends with to come in and be like, you know, if you hear it from another person, all of a sudden it makes sense. And he like, where'd you hear that before? You know, he'd get somebody else to do it, and then you'd be like, the bells would go off for everybody. And I always thought that was really cool. One that sticks out in particular is his friendship with Chuck Lute. He could easily sit in this loop of people and tell a lot of stories too. But I was, you know, a hot shot coming out of college. I went to IUP. I thought I was a real big wig coming in. And I was like, well, why can't we bring the IUP band to McLean for our show? And, you know, it was like, oh, we'll talk later about it. And it was like one of those sit in the chair in his office, that kind of things. And he described how you got to dance with who brought you to the dance. And that one sticks with me to this day. You know, those are the people that brought him along, and that's what you do for people. And that really stuck with me. And just his willingness to share the platform with people he trusted, and to be kind of brought into that myself was just like, wow, that was beyond. So I definitely try to remember that as I'm getting through my own careers. Like, you know, it's good for kids to play next to somebody who's better than them and hear the same thing from another person and have it click, and just like let that be how it happens, you know? So.
And you've already said today that, John, they didn't cut. If someone wanted to play, they would be in. And some of the bands did cut, and they'd come down with their shorter numbers, smaller numbers, because they had cut. John came in with 220 in the band, I think I remember. And they were out there playing their hearts out. And I asked him one time, John, I noticed some of the bands have white shoes. And he said, you know, Ron, I'd like to do that, but we have 220 in the band, and those white shoes show up if anyone's out of step. So we, you know, 220 people and not being cut. So they wore the black shoes, but they wore them well. And the kids just loved to play for him and for Rick and Judy and Marilyn. And it was a privilege for them to be. They were pleased. They beamed. They were a GM.
Exactly. They didn't always come away with trophies, but looking at all, like you were talking about the posts earlier, the memories, looking at all those, the kids, what they remember, it's not whether they won or they lost, it was the experience of being part of that family, of the band, and John, and how he cared and wanted them to be there, and he didn't cut people. If you want to be in music, come on. And it was parent pride. There's nothing wrong with having some pride. I'm sorry. They were the spirit and the pride of General McLane, and I can remember sitting in the audience as a parent, as a booster, and the parents were just in awe because the band just kept coming, and they would do their warm-up, and then they would turn around, and the sound was just unbelievable. And it was just something you always remember. But bottom line, it was a great experience, and I know all my kids are grateful for having had it.
Grateful is a good word. Todd shared something with me just a week ago, and this is going to be a Miyagi thing. But GM was down in Meadville, and we knew through the years General McLane did a lot of winning, and they were proud of that. But at this Meadville competition, they didn't win anything this particular year except percussion. And
we always won percussion because of my mom.
So what happened? And Brian Kelly was I think the drum major then. But anyway, they were leaving, and Meadville's band was their percussion unit was playing proudly, even though they didn't win, but the band had won a lot. So as General McLane is going by them, they stop for a minute, and Brian Kelly said something. Brian Kelly is a very nice gentleman, but he said, "This is what we're going to do." So as they went by, Meadville's band percussion unit is playing, and General McLane's percussion unit, who had just won, played over them. And I think John was giving a Miyagi.
Well, so I was in the marching band at the time when it had the massive numbers. And it was a time where we had some just outstanding musicians, some outstanding trumpet players, like Charles Meyer and Ryan Oldham.
Yeah.
And his brother Andy was in there, and Kelly Cordell. And so I remember my freshman year, we won. We didn't win first place at McDowell, which was the first competition. We got second, but we had taken all the music captions, and we cheered in the parking lot for 45 minutes, just standing there, with the caption trophies. And to us, that was winning, honestly. Yeah. Like I said, my mom always ran the best percussion in the area, so we regularly got that. But but that year we took all the music, just about every competition. I also remember we would, I think it was my junior year, we had a really rainy season. And so most of our competitions were indoors. So we were just judged on music, and we won all of those.
Well, some of the more competitive bands, going back to the late 80s and early 90s, they did cut. And they also, those band directors, you're in music, and that's it. If you want to be in sports and music, no. John allowed and accommodated the students who wanted to get more diversification and be in soccer but be in band, and he did not cut. And we still did very well.
Yeah, and I think that's something we didn't touch on today that's really important, is that it was incredibly important to him that if kids wanted to do sports, they could do that as well as band. And anytime you would talk to music teachers or administrators in other districts, they didn't understand that. They just couldn't understand how that could happen, and they always wondered why General McLane could have such a large band. And I think, and I remember in the early days, as because there was so much potential there, John was often lobbied, let's have extra rehearsals after school. And he was, no, that's not the philosophy. And we could have, and the band probably would have been smaller, but it could have been really, really good. But that wasn't what was important. And I think we know that in the end that was the right decision.
Yeah, my dad definitely didn't raise my sisters and me to become professional musicians. He really wanted us to appreciate music. He always said it's important that you learn an instrument, but it's also important that you learn to support the arts. And so he's like, I know you guys will go on to do other things where you'll be able to make money, where you can donate to the arts. And so he was also in the business of raising patrons, and that extended to his students as well.
Yeah, one of my kids who, if you knew him, you wouldn't think that he really loves smooth jazz. I just recently sat outside of a building in Denver with him listening to smooth jazz, and we were reminiscing. And I told your dad, too, before one of the last times I saw him about how that class that I think that year Corey was the only person in that jazz class, and it paid off. He loves jazz to this day, and he remembers everything about that class and how many times he watched whatever movie John was showing, or album he was listening to. And he really does love smooth jazz, as he says.
Well, so when I was in college, I went to the Illinois Institute of Technology, so it didn't have a music program, but on the same campus was the Vandercook College of Music, and it was a music education school. And they had an agreement, and so I could play all 4 years at Vandercook, which was just wonderful. My dad became like best buds with the director over there. But every year, the Vandercook College of Music was one of the first organizations to help start the Midwest International Band and Music Clinic. And so every year, Vandercook would get to play, and we would be like premiering all of these different pieces. And I was also, as a Vandercook person, working the different workshops. So I got to work the Wynton Marsalis workshop and Eddie Daniels. I got to meet Sammy Nestico when I was there. And people would just they're like, wait, you're not a music major? And I was like, no, but I'm just so passionate about all of this. But one thing that really struck me is I remember as I was being an usher, and this gentleman and his wife were cutting through, and I wasn't supposed to let them. But he's like, oh, I'm Francis Macbeth. And I was like, oh, we did Of Sailors and Whales my senior year for marching band. I was like, come on through. So,
Nice.
Wow.
but yeah, so I don't know, instilling that in me, and just, I don't know, so many things come full circle like that. Learning to love stuff when you're in those formative years of high school when you're finding yourself.
Just hearing you talk about him going into a big room with all these big names and music, and having that experience as a director and meeting all the directors, and it's this huge name, and he'd walk right up to him and they knew him. I'm like, he knows this guy? That's awesome. Oh, hey, John, how you doing? And big handshake, and he'd introduce you and get you in the loop all the time. Boy, was that cool. It's he was well known outside of the community too. You go to a meeting somewhere else and be everybody knows him. Wow, this guy's the Don. He knows everyone.
Speaking of well known and appreciated, I believe that John Marszalek might be the most well known and appreciated person in the history of Edinburgh in the last 50 years.
Amen.
Yeah, for sure. You made a major impact on, like we said earlier, thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He was a good guy. Good person that cared.
Yeah.
A privilege to have him in our lives.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and it was just a testament. Some of his former students would come up to the manor, and I know Ryan Burke helped feed him when he wasn't able to feed himself, and just have your former students come and care so much, just because they just wanted to show in a little way how much you meant to them. I don't know. Everybody's just been so kind. It's just made a difficult time better.
I had the memorable opportunity of visiting your dad within a few days at the manor. And when I went in to the main entrance, there were 6 or 7 ladies, nurses, helpers, and what have you. And I told Linda, I told them, I said, I'm here to see Mr. Marszalek. Oh, yeah. Went home and told Linda about the experience. And Linda said, perhaps and probably 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of those ladies had John Marszalek at General McLane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the last times I saw him at the manor, I don't know if you remember from his retirement party, I think it was, there were the big head cutouts of his face. That was a big hit with my grandkids, and I still have it. So I didn't know how he was going to be when I got to the manor, so I had it in a bag. And that day, we went to his room, and he wasn't there. I was like, where'd he go? He's watching TV. Well, we got down there, and he was kind of watching TV, kind of not. But so we chatted, and he was talking at that time, and it was like, hey, I got something to show you, John. And I ripped it out, and I put it up, and he just got the biggest smile. He got such a kick out of me having that thing there. It was good to, he was just such a good person, so much fun. And
Always had a good sense of humor about himself.
Always, yes. Oh, speaking of senses, okay, this is a Florida story. We were down there. This was early on, I guess. Disney is a little more lenient with their marchers these days, but back then it was near St. Patrick's Day, and one of the kids had dyed their hair green. He wasn't going to be allowed to be in the parade because they didn't allow that. Well, for some reason, John just happened to have this can of spray that kids had given him to cover up his bald spot. He had it with him and pulled it out. Oh, I'll take care of that. And they spray the kid's hair, so the kid got to march.
It worked.
It worked.
He should have actually tried it. It probably would have made him look younger.
Oh, that bald spot was infamous too. The kids would always talk about, he's having a bad day.
Well, and the little bit of hair that was left, like how high it was.
Oh yes,
would indicate his mood for that day.
Yeah, heard about that numerous times. Yeah, he's having a bad hair day.
There was a time when there was the morning plume report, where the student that would first see him coming in, if the plume was high, they'd come running in and plume alert, which meant he was in a bad mood. They called that the ream cast, because of the ream chair.
I'd never heard that before. Yeah. That's funny.
Oh yeah,
the plume report.
The plume report. Yeah. Well, am I sensing from our producer it's time to wrap this up?